The bride's train tore from waist to hem 3 minutes before she was to be married, and in the little vestry of Thornwick Church, a dozen well-dressed people discovered all at once that not one of them knew how to save it. It had gone in an instant. Winifred Fenn turned too quickly to show her mother the veil. A groomsman's heel came down on the hem, and the whole overskirt, 2 yards of old blonde lace, the finest work seen in the county in a generation, parted with a sound like tearing paper. Winnie looked down at the ruin of it and began without a word to cry. Her mother said, "Oh," and then found she had nothing to put after it. Madame Lyle, who had been paid 40 guineas to make the gown and had made not 1 stitch of it, went the color of cold tallow and pressed her ringed hands over her mouth. Through the open door came the murmur of the church, full and waiting, and under it the organ had already begun. "Let me." The voice was quiet and came from the corner where the sewing woman had been left to mind the pins. No one had looked at her all morning. She was a slight person of 22 in unrelieved gray, brown-haired, easily overlooked. The kind of face a room slides across on its way to something worth seeing. Past. She had come with Madame Lyle's boxes, as she always came, to do the work that Madame Lyle's name was paid for. She knelt into the wreck of the skirt without being told twice. From her pocket she drew a small silver thimble, worn thin and bright at the crown by another woman's 40 years of use, and fitted it to her finger the way a soldier fits a sword. Then her needle began to move. She did not sew the tear shut, which any village woman could have done, and which would have shown across a church like a scar. She worked instead the way her mother had taught her before the fever took her, drawing the broken threads of the lace back into their own pattern, coaxing the ripped edges to lie down and pretend they had never risen, laying a false ground so fine behind the wound that the light passed through it and told no tales. Her hands went quick and certain and entirely without hurry, which is the rarest thing in a pair of hands. She spoke once, low, not lifting her head. "Breathe, Miss Fenn." It was the lace that tore, not you. Lace can be told what to do. Winnie absurdly laughed through her tears. 4 minutes. The organ swelled toward its second turn. The girl bit the last thread with her teeth, smoothed the skirt flat with the back of her hand, and sat back on her heels. Where the tear had been there was only old blonde lace, whole, and the small silver thimble catching the vestry candlelight. "There," she said. "Go and be married." They went. Nobody thanked her. Madame Lyle swept out on the mother's arm, already accepting the compliments that would be paid before the day was done, and the girl in gray was left to gather the dropped pins from the floor on her knees. That was the shape of her life, and she had long ago stopped expecting it to be any other shape, but one person had not gone in with the others. A tall man in a dark traveling coat had stood the whole while in the shadow of the side aisle, a guest too grave for a wedding, and he had watched not the bride, but the hands. He watched the girl gather her pins now, with a stillness that would have frightened her had she noticed it. She did not notice it. She had learned young not to look up. Her name was Eloan Verity, though she had not spoken that name aloud in a public place for a long time, and she would not speak it again for longer still, because that same afternoon when the pins were counted back into their box and the light had gone flat and gray over the Thornwick Market Square, Eloan came out of the mercer's lane and saw a small crowd gathered at the inn steps, and at the top of the steps stood her stepmother, and over her stepmother's arm, held up for the whole town to see, hung Eloan's own wedding gown. She knew it the way you know your own hand. She had made it herself through the long autumn. Forced to it, told she would wear it to marry Osric Vane whether she willed it or no, and she had done the thing her mother's daughter could not help doing even inside a cage. She had made it beautiful. Into the bodice she had set the last of the Verity lace, the irreplaceable lace, the only piece of her mother she had left in the world. Sound work, is it not? Lay, Ottiline Merrick was saying to the London buyer at her side, in the carrying voice she kept for an audience. A pity to waste it on a girl who does not know her own good. She'll not wear it to a wedding, so it may as well fetch its price. Her eyes found Elowen at the edge of the crowd, and something in them warmed with pleasure. There she is, the bride who would not be a bride. Look well, Elowen. A girl who cannot even keep her own gown has no business turning up her nose at a man who'd feed her. The buyer counted coins into her palm. Osric Vane, thick and red at Adeline's shoulder, laughed. "She'll come crawling back inside the fortnight," he told the crowd comfortably. "Her sort always does. A month and she'll be glad of me." The lace went into the buyer's box. The box went onto the buyer's cart. And Elowen Verity stood in the market square and understood that they had not sold a gown. They had sold the last of her mother in front of everyone to teach her that she owned nothing, not even the work of her own two hands. She did not weep. She had learned young that weeping is a thing you give an audience, and she would give this one nothing at all. She turned and walked away up the darkening lane, and behind her she heard the fortnight laughed about a second time, and did not look back. She did not see the tall, grave man at the far corner of the square, who had watched this too. She did not see him say a low word to the servant at his side, nor the servant move off quietly after the buyer's cart. She was already gone. That night, Elowen took her mother's silver thimble, and the 14 shillings that were all the money she had in the world, and a change of linen, and she left Thornwick on the carrier's wagon before the town was awake. Somewhere behind her a cart rolled north with her wedding gown in it, and a man she had never met rode after it for reasons she could not have guessed. At the crossroads, a woman asked her name. "Elowen Reed," she said. It came out steady. It was the first lie of her new life, and it would not be the last. Asterisk to understand why a gifted woman would flee into service under a borrowed name rather than fight for what was hers. You have to understand what was hers, and how little of it the law would let her hold. Elowen's mother, Bryony Verity, had been the finest lacemaker in 3 counties. Great houses had waited a year for her work. A Verity bodice was a thing a bride kept for her daughter. She had built a small, honest workshop out of nothing but her hands, and she had meant it all to pass to Elowen, whom she had taught at her knee from the age of 6 until the spring fever carried her off. That much was love, and love leaves no ledger. But love had not signed the papers. Elowen's father had. He was a mild, tired mercer who grieved his wife by marrying, within the year, a handsome managing widow named Adeline Merrick, because a grieving man will reach for anyone who promises to make the deciding stop. Adeline came with a daughter Marin, and a great many debts wearing the clothes of respectability, and she looked at the Verity workshop the way a hungry person looks at a laid table. When Elowen's father died, his will did a kind and foolish thing. It left the workshop and all the Verity lace to Elowen, but it left them in Adeline's keeping until Elowen should turn 25, or marry with her stepmother's blessing, whichever came first. He had meant to give his daughter a guardian. He had given her a jailer with a key to everything she owned. Adeline's plan was neither clever nor original, which made it no less effective. She had promised Elowen to Osric Vane, a coarse man who held a great sheaf of the family's debts and would forgive them for a young wife and a famous workshop. If Elowen married Vane, the Verity name and the Verity lace passed quietly into Adeline's settling of her own accounts. If Elowen refused, well, a girl with no money and no friends could be worn down. Adeline had been wearing her down since the funeral. 3 years stood between Elowen and her freedom. On her 25th birthday, the workshop became hers outright, and no living soul could compel her to marry anyone. 3 years. She had only to survive them unfound and unwed, and everything her mother built came home. It was not a long time to a woman who had already spent her whole life being quiet. She could be no one for 3 years. She had been very nearly no one for 22. She had not reckoned on the one thing she could not change, and it was the same thing that had saved the Fenn wedding. Her hands were known. A Verity stitch was as good as a signature to anyone who understood cloth, and the whole of Elowen's small, dangerous gift, was that she could not make an ugly thing. Every gown she'd touched to earn her bread announced to the one buyer in 100 who had an eye that Bryony Verity's daughter was somewhere near and working. Adeline knew this. Adeline was, that very week, writing to the wardrobe women and the modistes of every town on the northern roads in the soft, reasonable voice of a worried guardian, asking after a runaway girl of 22 who sewed like an angel and could not be trusted, and begging to be told, in confidence, if such a one came seeking were. So Aloan ran from the thing she loved best in order to hide inside it. She took plain mending where she could and asked for the smallest wages, and buried her mother's technique so deep in dull, honest seams that no one would look twice. She wore gray. She kept her eyes down. She did the invisible work she had done all her life, only now the invisibility was the whole point, and the silver thimble stayed in her pocket where no fine lady would ever see it flash. It was a narrow way to live, and she told herself it was enough, and on the good days she believed it. She did not yet know that the road north had already delivered her, by the plain accident of where the coaching inns were cheapest and the work most badly needed, toward the one great house in the county where being seen truly would cost her everything, and in the end, save her life. Asterisk P. Key. Long and low and honey-colored, a house that looked as though it had grown up out of the land rather than been set down upon it. Aloan came to it on a raw morning at the end of March, with a character letter in a false name and a needle case in her pocket, to take the meanest post the housekeeper's absence had left, going sewing woman to the household, to mend what 400 years of linen required mending. She meant to be a shadow in it. She was good at being a shadow. It took her less than a week to see that the house was dying, and rather longer to understand that everyone in it already knew, and that not one of them would say the word aloud. It was a beautiful house, which was the pity of it. There was 200 years of good sense in its bones, but the silver had gone gray in its base. The great staterooms stood shut and shrouded, and the shrouded rooms breathed out the particular sweet-rot smell. That means a roof has been weeping somewhere unseen for a year, and no one has climbed to look. In the still room the shelves stood half bare. In the kitchen the range smoked, because the flue had not been swept since anyone could remember, and the cook, a broad, kind woman named Mrs. Billet. Pinnock wept over joints of meat she could not send back, because Mr. Sowerby settled with the butcher, and Mr. Sowerby was not to be questioned by a cook. And who, Aloan asked, careful to sound as though she did not much care, is Mr.
Sowerby?
The steward. Mrs. Pinnock said it the way one names weather. He come the year the old Duke died, and Mrs. Amberley, that was housekeeper, she died the winter after. Poor thing, and there's been no housekeeper set over us since. Only Mr. Sowerby. He has the running of everything, and the keys of everything, and answers to no one but the master. And the master. She stopped and busied her red hands with the meat. The master don't come down. There it was, the shape of the whole thing in 3 sentences. One man held all the keys. The master did not come down. And between those 2 facts a great house was quietly going to the bad. Aloan should have kept her eyes on her mending. She had crossed a county to keep her eyes on her mending, but she had been raised to run a household, a small one, a workshop of no account, but run it she had from the age of 14, and she could no more unsee a house being robbed than she could unlearn her own name. She knew what a linen press should smell like. She knew that a still room ought not to stand empty in March. And on her 4th day, sent to sort a great chest of surplus household stuffs that Sowerby had ordered carried out for sale, she knelt over it, lifted the top layer aside, and went cold to the fingertips. Under the plain linens, folded away as though it were nothing, lay a length of old blonde lace. She knew that lace. Not its like that lace. It was her mother's work. She could have named the year Bryony made it. It had no business in a chest of surplus rags, bound for a dealer's cart at 1/10 of its worth. Someone in this house was selling off, as kitchen refuse, treasures worth more than a footman earned in 10 years, and doing it under the honest word surplus, in a house where the one man who might have noticed would not come downstairs, and the one woman who could tell true lace from false had walked in that very week off the carrier's wagon, in gray, with her eyes down, meaning to see nothing at all. Eloan knelt very still over the chest with the lace across her 2 hands, and understood that she had a choice to make, and that she had already, in the way of her whole life, made the frightened one, to fold it back and say nothing, and keep her head down for 3 safe years. Then a door opened at the far end of the passage, and a tall man in a dark coat came through it, and stopped, and looked at her, and Eloan Verity looked up, straight into the grave still face of the stranger, who had watched her hands in Thornwick Church, and forgot, for one ruinous moment, to keep her eyes down, asterisk for the length of a held breath. The 2 of them looked at one another down the cold north passage, the girl on her knees with the stolen lace across her hands, and the master of the house standing over her, and Eloan watched something move behind his grave face, a groping, half-formed thing, a man reaching after a memory in a dark room. "You," he said, "I have seen your hands before." It was the worst sentence he could have spoken, and he did not know it. Eloan folded the lace back into the chest with the unhurried care of a woman who was not, on any account, going to let it show. "I have common hands, your grace," she said, low and level. "There are a great many of them. No." He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The house had taught everyone in it to go quiet when he spoke. Not common, but the memory would not come the rest of the way, and he was too tired to chase it. A man drowning slowly does not die for other men's puzzles. He looked at her a moment longer, then past her, at the chest, at the shut and shrouded rooms beyond, at the whole ruin he had spent a year refusing to see. Then he turned to go. An old spare man had come up soundless at his shoulder, the butler, gray and upright and 60, with a face Eloan could not read. The Duke paused at the turn of the passage. "Don't grow used to her, Quill," he said, not unkindly, to the wall more than the man. "This house keeps no one. They come and they go with the quarter days." And he went. The butler, Quill, did not answer his master, but he looked at the girl by the chest for a long moment, and he thought, though he said nothing to anyone, then, or for a good while after, that he had crossed a county behind a certain buyer's cart in the autumn, on his master's whim, to bring home a wedding gown made of just such lace as lay folded in that chest, and that in 40 years of service he had never yet seen anyone kneel to a chest of rags as though it held the bones of a saint. He filed the thought away where he kept such things and went down himself to help her lift the chest, which was not a thing butlers did. Eloan thought she had been careful. She had reckoned without the one person at Elvedon Hall who was harder to deceive than any duke. The summons came the next afternoon. The Dowager Duchess of Elvedon, who was named Araminta and was 79, and had buried a husband, a son, and a granddaughter without once being seen to bend, kept the one warm room in that cold house, a small south parlor with a fire she guarded like a dragon. She had her sewing woman brought up on a pretext of a torn shawl, and she let Eloan kneel to the hem for a full minute before she spoke. "You mend like a person who has been taught by someone who loved you," the old woman said. "Not like a servant. Look at me, girl. I did not have you brought up here to admire the back of your neck." Eloan looked up. The dowager's hand had gone to knots with age. Her eyes had gone nowhere at all. Where? They were reading Eloan the way Eloan read cloth. "You are not what you are pretending to be," Araminta said, "and before you trouble yourself to lie to me, I will tell you that I do not care what you are running from. I have run from a thing or two in 80 years, and the good ones always run from something. What I care about is my house." She set aside her sharpness for a moment, and something older and worse sat under it. "You have seen it. Do not be tactful. I have no time left for tactful, and I never had the taste for it. Tell me what my house looks like to a stranger with an eye." So Eloan told her. Not everything, never everything, but the cold rooms and the weeping roof and the empty still room and the range that smoked, and carefully, the great chest of treasures going out at the door under the word surplus. The old woman listened without moving. When it was done, she was quiet a long while. "My grandson," she said at last, "is not a fool. He is a grieving man, which wears the same coat but is a different animal underneath. His sister ran this house, Sedany. My Sedany, 23, and worth the whole pack of us, and she died of a fever in the spring, a week from her own wedding, with her gown still on the frame. He has not gone into the east wing since. He signs whatever the steward sets before him, because signing is easier than reading a dead girl's hand. And a man of that sort," she said, "is the easiest thing in the world to rob." She looked at Eowyn with her unclouded eyes. "You have an eye, and a spine, and a reason of your own to be quiet, which suits me, because quiet is what I need. I am going to give you the linen and the still room and the wardrobe on my own authority, which in this house is a great deal older than the steward's. You will call yourself its keeper, and no one will gainsay you, because no one gainsays me twice, a dry gleam. My grandson tells me the house keeps no one past the quarter day. You have until midsummer, girl, to make yourself a thing he cannot do without. I suggest you use it." Asterisk. Eowyn used it. The house did not believe in her, and the house said so in the way of houses below stairs, and never once to her face. By the end of her first fortnight there was a wager in the servants' hall, and everyone knew of it, and it was reckoned a fair one. 6pence, said the new sewing woman with the borrowed authority, would be gone by the summer, packed off like the last 3 the dowager had tried to set over them, worn thin by the cold rooms and the shut-away master and the pink soft steward who ruled the pair of them. The betting ran heavily against her. Even Nessa, the under-housemaid who liked her, had laid her 3pence quietly on the month. Eowyn knew of the wager within 3 days, because a woman who has been invisible all her life hears a great deal that louder people miss. She did not resent it. On the whole, she thought it a sensible bet. She had made much the same wager herself, the night she signed a false name at the crossroads. She did not mean to win it by argument. She had never in her life won anything by argument. She had a small voice and no rank, and a secret that could not bear examining, and the one time in her life she had raised her voice, "No, I will not marry him." It had cost her her mother's lace in a market square. She meant to win the only way she trusted, which was to become, quietly and without fuss, the thing the house could not remember having done without. Let the doing be the whole of the argument. A house does not thank you for saving it. It only stops dying, and stops is thanks enough. So she did not scold, and she did not command, and she did not once remind a soul that the dowager had given her leave. She simply took hold of the things nobody else would touch, one after another, and did them until they were done well. She began with the linen, because a linen press is a house's honesty, folded small. She had every press struck and turned, the sound sheets washed and mended, the rotted ones cut down for bandages and dusters, so that nothing was wasted. She had the great flue swept, which cost 8pence, and stopped the kitchen smoking for the first time in a year, and Mrs. Pinnock cooked from that day like a woman let out of prison. She found the stateroom hangings gray with damp and black with moth, and rather than let them go, she took them down herself and worked them by candlelight, reweaving 2 centuries of faded crewel work, so cunningly that where the moth had eaten the vine simply grew again. She could not make an ugly thing. It was her gift, and that spring, her cover. She sent the green meat back to the Thornwick butcher with a note in her own hand, courteous and immovable, and the next joint came in red. She had the still room scoured and set the maids to bottling the first of the season, and the shelves that had stood bare since a dead girl last filled them began jar by jar to fill again. It was in the still room that she first met Sidney, though the girl had been a year in the ground. At the back of the highest shelf behind the spoiled preserves stood a row of little pots in a young woman's round and hopeful hand: cowslip for the throat, rose for a fever, quince keep for winter. Every one of them turned to ruin now, untouched since the spring the fever came. Eloan cleaned each pot and threw the spoiled stuff away, but she could not bring herself to scrape the labels off. It seemed to her a small unkindness to wash away the handwriting of the dead, when the dead had left so little else behind. She kept them, empty and clean and labeled, on a shelf of their own, and told no one why. She had learned, from the shape of her own grief, that a house remembers with its hands long after its master has forgotten how. And she noticed, sorting the wardrobe presses, that a great deal of what a young mistress should have left behind was simply gone. The good silks, the christening lace, the duchess's court train, all of it entered in no list she could find. All of it vanished out of the house in the year since the burying. A dead girl's gowns do not walk off by themselves. Someone had carried them, and she did all of it gently, so that no one felt managed. She learned the names of the servants and the troubles behind the names. When Nessa scalded her wrist, it was Eloan who dressed it. When the old laundress's eyes failed at close work, it was Eloan who quietly took the fine mending off her and left her the plain, so the woman kept her wages and her pride both. One by one, the house came to her. The maids brought her their small disasters instead of weeping into the coal scuttle. Mrs. Pinnock consulted her on the dinners. Even Quill, who trusted no one under 60 on principle, began to bring her the household questions he had used to carry uselessly to a shut door upstairs. Without a title, and without ever once wishing to be seen, Eloan had begun to run the house. The Duke felt it before he understood it, the way a man feels a change in the weather in an old wound. He did not go to the still room or the linen passage. Those were another country. But he could not help remarking that the coffee came up hot, that the smoke was gone from the morning, that the long dining table at which he ate alone each night, a barren stretch of mahogany with one place laid at the far end of it, like a man taking his supper at the foot of a coffin, had one evening been quietly shortened to a modest and human size. His single place laid close to the fire. "Who did this?" he said to Quill. It was not quite a question. "The keeper of the linen thought your grace might dine more comfortably, sir," said Quill. "Shall I have it made long again?" The Duke looked at the small, warm table a long moment. "No," he said, and that was all. But the butler noted that his master, for the first time since April, had eaten as though the food were meant for a living man. Eloan, meanwhile, had begun to keep a book. It was a small thing, a household book of her own, no more than her authority allowed. What came in at the door for the still room and the linen in the kitchen, what was truly paid for it, week by week, in the plain figures the tradesman gave her at the step. She kept it because she had kept her mother's accounts from the age of 14 and could not sit in a house without feeling for its pulse. And a house is a single body. Put your finger on one vein and you feel the whole heart labor. She wrote down what the Thornwick draper was truly paid, and the chandler, and the carrier, and within a fortnight she noticed, with the small cold drop she had felt over the chest of lace, that her figures and the house's figures did not agree. The draper was paid 9 shillings the week. He told her so himself, and showed his own tally to prove it. But when the quarter's reckoning was posted on the servants' board, as Sowerby posted it for form's sake, the draper's line read 14 and 6, 5 shillings and 6 pence a week, on one tradesman. Eloan stood in the cold passage and looked at the posted sheet for a long time, and did not touch it, and said nothing to anyone, because she was very good at saying nothing. She had years of practice. But she knew what 5 shillings looked like now. And a thing you know sits in you like a swallowed stone, however sensibly you tell yourself to let it lie. Asterisk, asterisk. She told herself it was the draper's error or the steward's carelessness, for a day and a half. She did not believe it even while she was telling it. A careless man's figures are wrong in both directions. A thief's are wrong in only one. The chance to be sure came on a Tuesday, when Sowerby rode to the Thornwick Sessions, and the estate office at the end of the North Passage stood, for once, with its door on the latch, and no soft pink man behind it. The office shared a wall with the great storeroom, and the storeroom was allowance now by the dowager's word. She told herself she was only counting sheets. She had told herself a great many careful things that spring. She stood in the office doorway and looked at the shelf, and the first thing she saw undid a day and a half of pretending. There were 2 inventory books for the current year. 2, bound alike in the same brown calf, standing side by side, one worn soft at the corners from handling, and one clean as a new tooth. She should not have touched them. She knew she should not. She opened the clean one first. It was the fair copy, the one that was shown when a thing was shown. The estate a little poor but honest, stores accounted for, the late Duchess's wardrobe and Lady Sidney's, it noted, given over to the moth and disposed of as surplus of no value, a few shillings the lot. Eloan had a length of that valueless surplus, folded in her own workbox upstairs. She could have sold it in London for £40, and been thought to have given the buyer a bargain. She opened the worn one. The worn one was the truth, and the truth was ugly. Here were the same goods, gathered and gone, but here, in a cramped private hand, were the prices they had truly fetched, from the dealer Sowerby dealt with, not shillings but pounds, guineas, whole small fortunes in old lace and plate and a dead girl's silk, carried quietly out the north door and sold, while the fair book upstairs told the master they had rotted. Here were the tradesmen's bills, marked paid at one figure in the shown book, and settled at a lower one in the true. Here were the tenants' rents, gathered higher than the fair copy owned, a shilling squeezed from this widow and that cottager, and never entered at all. The whole quiet river of it ran off the page and out of the house and into no name that any honest man could read. Eloan stood in the failing light and understood that she was not looking at a servant pocketing spoons. She was looking at the patient, well-inked plunder of a great house, the work of the 12-month since its young mistress died of a fever, and its master shut his eyes on the world. Sowerby had not needed to be clever. He had needed only to wait, and he had waited years for exactly such a chance. Coming to Elvedon when the old Duke died, biding while Lady Sidney lived and kept the books honest, and settling in to feed the moment the fever left the house with a grieving man at its head, who would sign anything sooner than open a drawer that smelled of the dead. He had gone into the estate the way rot goes into a sound beam, from the inside in the dark, taking his time. She turned the worn pages with the tip of one finger, careful to leave no mark, and read the cost of the thing in the language she knew best of all. Here was Lady Sidney's court silk, entered as moth-spoiled, discarded, sold to a dealer in the city for 11 guineas. Here was the christening lace of 4 generations of the family, called rag, and gone for 9. Here, and at this her breath went shallow, was a line she could have wept over, a bolt of Bryony, Verity's own work, bought cheap out of some other broken house and sold dear again, the trade running in and out of Elvedon like tainted blood through a heart that no longer felt it. Every figure in the worn book was a small grave, and Sowerby had dug them by candlelight through the long year of mourning, while the man who might have stopped him sat one floor above, signing his name to the shovel. And she understood something else, colder still. The Verity lace in that chest had not come to Elvedon by chance. Sowerby bought his stock of the ruin of great houses through the same London dealers to whom he sold, the very dealers who had bought a runaway girl's wedding gown off a cart in a market square the autumn before. She had run the length of a county to be nobody, and the road had set her down inside the one house whose thief traded in the wreck of her own life. She heard the outer door. There was no time to think. She put the worn book back, exactly as it had stood corner to corner with its twin, and she was in the storeroom counting sheets aloud onto a slate when Mr. Sowerby came in from the sessions with the rein on his shoulders, a soft, pink, pleasant-faced man of 40, who smiled a very great deal and who stopped in the doorway between the two rooms and looked at her for a moment too long. "You keep late hours for a sewing woman, Miss Reed," he said and smiled. "So near my office, too. One does wonder what a quiet girl finds to count, so far from her needle after dark. Asterisk, asterisk, sheets Mr. Sowerby." Eloan held up the slate so the tally faced him. 24 pair of Holland, and 11 only of them whole. Her Grace wished the linen known to the last pillow slip, and I find I cannot count it by day, for the day is spoken for. You are welcome to check my figures. She set the slate down without hurry. "I am told you have a fondness for figures." It landed, she saw it land, a flicker under the pink, there and gone. He came a soft step nearer, light-footed, for so heavy a man, and when he spoke, the smile had not moved at all, which was the worst of him. "A word of kindness, Miss Reed, from one servant to another." His voice was gentle as goose down. "This is a large house with a great deal of dark in it, and a young woman with no people for. You have none, I think. Does well to keep to her needle and ask no questions whose answers cannot feed her. Her Grace is 79. She will not always be by to lend you her authority, and keepers of linen, like companions, come and go." The smile deepened. "I should be sorry to see you go before your time." Eloan looked at him, level and unafraid, and in that half-second she saw the thing under the smile, and it steadied her more than any comfort could have. He was afraid of her. He had come in smiling to frighten a girl, and it was his own fear that had walked him through the door, because a quiet woman with a slate had been standing too near his book. "I keep excellent accounts, Mr. Sowerby," she said pleasantly. "It is the one accomplishment no one has ever wished me to give up. Good evening." And she walked past him with her slate, and did not let her hands shake until she had reached the stair. She did not go to the Duke. She told herself it was sense. It was also fear, and she was too honest with herself to pretend otherwise. But the house had its own slow way of throwing them together, and it did so in the one room the master had not surrendered. The library at Elvedon was a long north room with 200 years of reading in it, and it was the single room the Duke still used. Sent up one evening to find a volume for the Dowager, Eloan came upon him there, not reading, only sitting, a shut book on his knee, and the fire burned low, a man keeping a kind of vigil over nothing. She made to withdraw. He did not look round. "Find what you were sent for. You are the quietest person in this house. You will not disturb me." So she found the book and lingered a moment by the shelves, and they spoke of nothing at all. The weather, the state of the Thornwick Road, whether the Swifts had come back to the stable court, and after that, by no arrangement that either of them would have owned to. She came most evenings, and most evenings he was there, and the library became a country the two of them shared and did not speak of by daylight. He was, she found, exactly what his grandmother had promised, not cold, but drowning. Under the shut-face was a man of dry, exact humor, and a great buried gentleness gone all to grief, the way a walled garden goes to nettles when there is no longer anyone with the heart to walk in it. He spoke of his sister only once. It was late, the fire down to a red eye, and he did not look at Eloan when he said it. "She sat where you are sitting, Sidney. She used to read me the quarrels out of the county paper until I laughed, and I did not laugh readily. So she counted each one a victory and kept a tally on the chimney breast." A pause. "I was in the city when the fever took her. Her betrothed settlements did not please me. I did not trust the man to be kind to her, and I stayed to be careful, to be certain, to be right. I was 4 days being right. She was in the ground before I reached the North Road." He turned the shut book over in his long hands. "I have never since been able to name for you the thing that kept me, only that, at the time, it seemed to matter more than a letter that said she was a little unwell." Eloan did not say she was sorry. She had learned in the shape of her own losses that sorrow offered to a stranger is the emptiest coin in the language. She said instead, "She kept a tally of your laughing." That is not a thing you do for a brother you find cold." And something moved at the corner of the Duke's mouth that was not quite a smile, the ghost of one, the almost, and for a moment, the room was less like a tomb. She went down that night with her heart unquiet, because she had, in her locked and careful life, been given a second dangerous thing to guard, and this one she had not chosen. She thought, "There is a good man in there, drowning." And then she thought of the worn brown book, and the widow squeezed for her shilling, and the wedding gown gone north on a cart, and told herself very firmly that none of it was hers to mend. She almost believed it. We'll pause here just a moment. If you'd like to see how Eloin's quiet war ends, and what the Duke does when the whole county is watching, take a second to subscribe, so the rest of the story finds you. Now, back to Elvedon. Asterisk. She had the proof, or the beginning of it, and for 3 days and 3 nights she did nothing with it. Her reasons were good, and one of them was cowardice, and she was too clear-eyed to dress the second as the first. To carry the worn book to the Duke was to be believed or disbelieved, and either way to be seen, and to be seen was to be asked her name, her people, her history. A keeper of linen who made an enemy of the steward and could not make her charge stick would be turned off with a bad character. A servant turned off with a bad character would be talked of and written after and traced. And once traced, once named aloud, she was Eloin Verity again, the runaway ward, hunted home to be married to Osric Vane for the sake of her mother's lace. Better to keep her head down. Better to let a rich man's house rob itself for 3 more safe years and take her freedom and go. It was not her house. It was not her fight. She told herself all of that. And then, on the 4th morning, the dowager sent her out to the cottages at the valley's foot, with a basket of jelly for an old woman, and the fight chose her. The old woman was Mistress Pellow, who was 70, and lived alone with a roof like a sieve. Her rent had gone up at Lady Day, though nothing under heaven had been done to earn it, and she folded her swollen hands over the basket and did not complain of any of it. "Mr. Sowerby says the master has need of it," she said comfortably. "And the master's a good man that buried his sister, poor soul, so I'll not grudge him my shilling. I only wonder, now and again, that the roof was never mended, that he charged us the mending of 2 winters back. But I'll not trouble his grace with a roof, not with his grief." Eloin stood in the doorway of the leaking cottage with the jelly in her hand, and looked at the old woman troubling no one, and was ashamed to the bone, because there it was, the whole machine laid bare in a sentence. Sowerby had never needed to be clever. He had built his theft on the decency of good people, on a grieving master who would not look, on old women too loyal to complain, on a keeper of linen too frightened for her own skin to speak. Everyone in it was being good, and a house full of good, grieving, frightened people would go on being quietly gutted, cottage by cottage and shilling by shilling, until one of them was willing to be seen. She went home and washed the empty basket and made up her mind. She could not go to the Duke as a servant carrying a rumor. He would not credit it, or Sowerby would name her a hysteric and have her gone by the week's end. She needed the thing itself, the true figure set against the shown, and witnesses who could not be waved off. She needed, for once in her careful invisible life, to become entirely and dangerously visible. So she set out to build her case the way she kept her accounts. Quietly, in her own hand, a shilling of proof at a time. The office was locked now and watched, but she did not need the office. She built it from the outside in. Under the honest cover of settling the household's own bills, she gathered the tradesmen's own tallies, the drapers, the chandlers, the carriers, and copied every figure fair. She had Mistress Pellow and 2 other cottagers make their marks to a plain statement of the rent they truly paid. Where her figures met, the posted figures, they told the whole tale, in daylight, and no smiling man could laugh a column of daylight away. She did the copying at night, by a single candle, with her door bolted, because she had understood from the first that a half-built case was worse than none. A rumor Sowerby could smile aside. A ledger he could not. And she hid what she built, where a thief would never think to look, and a maid would never dare, not in a box, but in her work. She copied the figures small onto fine paper, and quilted the sheets flat between the layers of a needlework panel, a half-finished mourning piece of gray silk that hung, unremarkable among a dozen others of her mending. Her mother had taught her that the safest place to keep a secret is inside something too dull to steal. Each night she unpicked 3 stitches, slid the day's proof between the layers, and sewed it shut again. The case against Sowerby grew, page by hidden page, inside a panel he passed twice a day and never once saw. Twice he nearly had her. Once he came upon her in the north passage after dark with a candle in her hand, and asked gently what a keeper of linen did so far from the linen at that hour. She was airing the presses against the damp, she said, which was true, and he could not gainsay it, though he did not like her being there, and she saw that he did not. He had built his whole quiet theft on there being no one in the house who looked or listened or wrote things down, and a woman the tenants had begun to bring their troubles to was precisely such a person, and troubles brought to the right person add up. So she did her honest work where he could watch it, and kept her ledger where he could not, and waited. She had learned patience the way other women learn embroidery, one small stitch at a time, and she could outwait any man on earth. She had outwaited a great deal already. Asterisk, asterisk. It was the dowager who made the thing official, in the way that very old women make things official, which is to say without asking a living soul's leave. One afternoon in May, when Eloin came up to the south parlor, a small carved coffer lay open on the table by the fire. On a bed of faded velvet inside it lay a great ring of keys, a dozen and more, iron and brass, worn bright at the wards by 200 years of turning. The plate room, the linen presses, the cellars, the storerooms, the still room, the muniment chest. Eloin knew them for what they were the instant she saw them, because a woman raised to keep a house knows a housekeeper's keys the way a soldier knows the weight of a sword. These were Sidonie's, the dowager said, and Mrs. Amberley's before her, and hers before that. They have hung on the same hook by the still-room door since before my husband's grandfather was a boy. Her knotted hands did not go near the ring. When my granddaughter died, Sowerby lifted them off that hook and locked them in his office, and told my grandson it was for safekeeping, and my grandson was too far gone in his grief to hear the lie in it. A man who holds all the keys of a house holds the house. The old eyes came up very bright. I have got them back. Do not ask me how I am, 79, and I have my ways. Your Grace, I am a sewing woman. You are what I say you are, and I say, you are my housekeeper. Araminta closed the coffer with a small, dry click. You have run this house since March on nothing but my word and your own 2 hands. It is time the house wore its truth where the county can see it. Take the keys, girl. Wear them at your waist, on your person, where every maid and every tradesman and every smiling thief will hear you coming and know who turns the locks now. She held Eloin's eye. And when the day comes that someone tries to take them off you, for someone will, you hold on. Eloin took the keys. They were heavier than she had thought. She wore them from that afternoon, and their small iron music went before her down every passage of Elveden, and week by week the sound of it became the sound of the house itself, remembering how to be a house. The maids heard her coming. The tradesmen at the door heard her coming, and Sowerby heard her coming too, and the smile grew a little fixed upon his face, for a keeper he could threaten was one thing, and a housekeeper with the ancient keys of the house swinging at her waist by the dowager's own hand was quite another. She wore them the evening she next sat with the Duke in the library. He looked at them a long moment, where they hung bright against her gray gown, and something crossed his face she could not read. Grief, perhaps, or the memory of another woman who had worn them, or the first faint stirring of a thing he had no name for yet. "My grandmother gave you those," he said. "It was not a question." "She did, Your Grace. I told her the county would talk." "Let it." He weighed the shut book in his hands. "Sidney used to say a house cannot be run by a man's signature. She said, it wants a woman's keys and a woman's eye, or it goes to the bad from the inside, while the master signs his name to the ruin of it." He was quiet a moment. "I did not understand her then. I begin to. I have signed a great deal this year that I did not trouble to read." Eloin's heart went still. It was the nearest he had come to the thing she had built, stitch by hidden stitch, in the gray silk panel upstairs. "Then, perhaps," she said carefully, "Your Grace ought to begin reading again." He looked at her across the low fire, and for a moment she was certain he would ask her outright what she knew. But he was not ready, and neither, in truth, was she. The moment settled and cooled, and they sat on in the shared country of the library, each holding a corner of the same truth, neither yet willing to spread it on the table between them. Neither of them knew that the choosing was about to be taken clean out of their hands. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Lady Vespera Crane came to Elvedon in the first week of June, and she was a far more dangerous thing than Sowerby, because Sowerby wanted only money. She was the Duke's second cousin, a widow of 35, handsome in a bright, hard, well-kept way, and she had been born to a great deal more than she now had. Her father had gambled the family portion into the sea. Her late husband had left her a jointure that shrank with every quarter day. Since Sidney's death, she had come to Elvedon oftener and stayed longer, and she had a plan that was the very twin of Adeline Merrick's, though the two women had never met and would have despised one another on sight. Lady Vespera meant to be the next mistress of Elvedon as its duchess if she could manage it, for she was his cousin and unwed, and as the power behind its shut door if she could not. A grieving bachelor, a dwindling jointure, a great house with no mistress. To a clever, frightened woman it was not a scheme, but a rescue. She had chosen Sowerby 3 years before, or he had chosen her. It came to the same. She smoothed his way to the master. He saw to it that her small county debts were quietly settled out of the estate's quiet river. Each propped the other, and each understood that the other could hang them. Lady Vespera saw. Within a day of her arrival, everything that had changed. She saw the shortened table and the swept flue and the filled still-room. She saw the small gray housekeeper who moved through the house as though it belonged to her with the ancient keys at her waist. And where Sowerby had seen only an inconvenient girl, Lady Vespera, who was cleverer and whose whole art was watching, saw something he had missed entirely, that the housekeeper was not merely capable, but hiding. "Read," she said one afternoon over the dowager's tea, turning the name on her tongue like a sweetmeat she suspected of being off. "From where, one wonders? There are Reeds in the Fen country, I think. Are you a Fen country Reed, Miss Reed?" "Nowhere so settled, my lady. My people were plain and are gone. Gone. How convenient. I mean, how sad." The smile did not touch the eyes. "And left you nothing, so that you must carry other women's linen, though you sew, they tell me, like something out of a story. How wearing it must be, to have been born a little above your fortune, neither served nor surfing, always watched for the false step." She sipped. "I do watch, Miss Reed. It is my one accomplishment. My cousin thinks me an idle woman, but I watch." "Then you keep better books than I do, my lady," Eloin said. "For I never learned the trick of watching people. I only ever learned to watch the cloth." And from the depths of her chair the dowager made a small sound that, in a less magnificent woman, would have been a snort. But Lady Vespera had her scent now, and she was not a woman to lose it. Among the wreck of her connections, she had a cousin married to a country attorney, and she set that cousin, in the soft roundabout way of country attorneys, to asking along the northern roads whether anyone had heard of a gentlewoman's daughter of about 22, gone from her people the autumn before. It was the very question Adeline Merrick had been paying to have asked for 3 months, from the other end of the same county. 2 hunts, blind to one another, closing on the same small quarry from opposite directions. The answer came, as such answers do, in the middle of everything else, and on the worst possible morning. For it came on the very day a traveling chaise turned in at the Elvedon gates, its horses blown, and set down in the forecourt a red-faced man in a plum-colored coat and a handsome managing woman in gray, an Eloin Verity, crossing the court with an armful of cut roses for the hall, looked up and let the roses fall. Said Adeline Merrick with enormous satisfaction, "There you are, you ungrateful, unnatural girl." The roses lay scattered across the gravel between them. Osric Vane heaved himself down from the chaise, thick and red and pleased. "Do you know what you have cost me in post-horses, hunting you the length of England? Get your box. You were going home to be married as your father wished, and there's an end of it." And that was the moment. Of all the moments that the Duke of Elvedon came down his own front steps. He had heard the chaise. A strange carriage in his forecourt was still faintly his affair. He came down into the middle of it, a fat stranger in plum bellowing at his housekeeper, a hard, handsome woman naming her a thief and a runaway, and drifting out from the garden with a letter held aloft in triumph lighting her face, his cousin, Lady Vespera. Sowerby appeared soft-footed in the doorway to watch, and in the center of it all stood the small gray woman who had, without his ever quite noticing, taught his house to breathe again. White, and still among a ruin of roses. "What?" said the Duke, in the low, level voice that the whole house had long ago learned to go silent before, "is the meaning of this? It came out all at once, and it came out badly." Osric Vane was delighted to find a duke to appeal to, and laid the whole of it before him in his own colors. The handsome woman at his side was the girl's own lawful guardian. The girl herself was a gentlewoman's daughter, with a workshop and a fortune in old lace held in trust, promised to him in honest marriage, who had run from her plain duty like a thief in the night and hidden herself in service under a false name, and his grace, all unknowing, had been harboring a deceitful fortune-hiding girl who had lied her way beneath his roof. And Lady Vespera, stepping forward with her letter, confirmed every syllable in her sweet, hard voice. "It is quite true, cousin. I made inquiries for the household's protection, you understand. She is precisely what this gentleman says, a gentlewoman's daughter with means of her own, playing at being a poor sewing woman, and one does ask oneself why the letter trembled, delicate, in her fingers. A woman who hides a fortune in lace to scrub your linen? What else might she be hiding? Whose accounts, for instance? Has she been so very busy copying, alone, after dark?" She turned her lovely, pitying face to the Duke. "I think only of your safety, cousin, and your grandmother's." Every face in the forecourt turned to Eloin, and she looked at the Duke, and saw his face begin to do what it had done that first day in the passage, close, and withdraw, and consider that she had lied to him. The one person in a year who had looked at him without fear, and she had a hidden name, a hidden fortune, a hidden reason for copying his books exactly as his cousin said. She watched the door of the shared country begin to shut behind his eyes, and she found, standing among the fallen roses, that she was not afraid any longer. It is a strange thing to dread a moment for 3 years, and to arrive inside it at last, and find the dread all burned away. She had spent her whole life being invisible in order to be safe. Here was safety ending in a forecourt, in front of everyone, and the sky had not fallen. There was only the truth left, and the truth, at least, was simple. "Every word this gentleman has said is true," she said. Her voice carried clear and level across the gravel. "My name is Eloin Verity. My father left me my mother's workshop and her lace in trust, and named this woman my guardian until I should turn 25 or marry a man of her choosing. I ran the night she sold my mother's last lace in the Thornwick market, to shame me into the marriage, sold it laughing before the whole town, to teach me I owned nothing, not even the work of my own hands. I came here under a false name and told the Dowager Duchess I was a poor woman without prospects, which is true. For money you cannot touch. For 3 years is no prospect at all. I hid what I was. I did not hide it to cheat this house. I hid it to stay alive." She turned from Adeline to the Duke, and now she was aware of nothing but him. "And yes, Your Grace, your cousin is quite right. I have been copying your accounts for 3 months. I have them upstairs, fair and complete. The true rents against the posted rents, the tradesmen's own tallies against the settled figures, your tenants' marks against the shillings they were squeezed for. I have Lady Suddenly's court silk, entered in your steward's honest book as moss-spoiled and thrown away, and sold in the city for 11 guineas. I have your east wing roof, mended on paper for £40 2 winters gone, and letting the rain onto my head not a week since. I did not bring it to you, and I was wrong not to, and I will tell you plainly why. I was a coward, and I had a name of my own to hide, and I told myself a rich man's house was not my affair." Her voice did not shake. "It was not my affair. I made it my affair. And you are being robbed, sir, root and branch, patiently, in good ink, by the man smiling in your own doorway. And I can prove it to you in an afternoon. For 1 heartbeat, nobody moved." "Then," Sowerby laughed, soft and pink and pleasant, and it was the wrong thing, and he knew at the instant it was out of him, because a man does not laugh at a true account, and every soul in the forecourt heard the difference. And the Duke of Elfdon was no longer looking at Elowen as at a bill he had not expected. He was looking at her the way a drowning man looks at a rope, but he did not go to her. He turned instead to his butler, who had come out quiet onto the steps. "Quill," he said, "the trunk from the north attic, the one that came home in the autumn. Bring it down." Elowen did not understand. Neither did anyone else. Adeline had begun to say something about magistrates. The Duke lifted one hand, and she stopped. "Last October," he said, and he spoke now to the whole forecourt, though his eyes did not leave Elowen's face. "I was 3 days in the town of Thornwick, on my sister's business, the settlements of a wedding that death had already made pointless. I had not yet learned to stop being careful on her account. I am a poor traveler these days. I keep to the edges of things and I watch, because watching asks nothing of you. In the market square, I watched a woman sell a wedding gown off the steps of an inn to shame a girl who would not be sold with it. His voice was very quiet and very steady, and it carried to the walls. I did nothing. I have done nothing for a year. It is the thing I have grown expert in. But the gown was made of a lace I knew, the same lace my sister had wanted for her own gown and never got, and I could not bear to see it go onto a dealer's cart, so I sent my man to buy it, and I brought it home, and I put it in a trunk with everything else I could not look at. Quill and a footman set the trunk down on the gravel. The Duke lifted the lid himself. He drew out the wedding gown, Elowen's gown, whole, the Verity lace pale as milk in the June light, and the sound that went through the forecourt was the sound of a great many people understanding a thing at once. Adeline Merrick's face fell open. Osric Vane's satisfaction curdled. And Elowen, who had not wept in a market square, and had not wept over a worn brown book, and had not wept giving up her name in front of the whole county, put her hand to her mouth. "I did not know it was yours," the Duke said to her, only to her now. "I did not know the hands I saw mending a stranger's gown in a church were the same hands that made this one. I have been a slow, blind, grieving fool in my own house, Miss Verity, and you have spent 3 months saving it while I signed my name to its ruin. I know which of us the county should be protected from." He looked at last at Sowerby, and his face was terrible and awake. "Show me the books, both of them, tonight. Asterisk. They did it in the library, and it took the rest of that day and half the night." Elowen fetched her hidden proof, 3 months of it, unpicked, stitch by stitch from the gray silk panel, and laid it on the long table. Quill brought the tradesmen in from Thornwick in their Sunday coats, uneasy under the high ceiling, and one by one they set their own tallies beside hers and swore to the figures: the draper, the chandler, the carrier, the roofer from Thornwick who had never in his life mended any roof over any east wing, because no one had ever paid him to. Mistress Pellow and 2 other cottagers made their marks again by candlelight before the Duke's own eyes. And when the Duke sent Quill to the office for the 2 brown books and opened them side by side, he understood the whole of it in about 4 minutes, being, as his grandmother had always said, not a fool, but a grieving man, which is a different animal. He was very quiet when he had finished. He set his hand flat on the worn cover, on his sister's estate, on the year he had refused to look at, and when he spoke, it was not to Sowerby. She kept these fair, he said to no one, to the shut east wing, Sidney, and I never opened them after because opening them meant reading her hand, and I could not. So I let a man rob the tenants she loved, cottage by cottage, rather than look at a column of her figures. He closed the book. Get out of my house tonight, Sowerby. You will stand before the Thornwick bench at noon tomorrow, and every figure this lady has taken will stand there with you. What you have squeezed from my people you will restore. What you cannot restore, I will restore, and count it cheap. Quill, see him pack, watch his hands. Sowerby went, in the end, because there was nothing else left for him to do. At the library door, he turned once, and all the pink softness had gone out of him, and he looked at Eloan with a hatred that had no smile left in it at all. You could not simply keep to your needle, he said. No, Eloan agreed. I never could. Good night, Mr. Sowerby. That left Lady Vespera, who had sat through the whole long reckoning in the corner, her letter crushed to nothing in her lap, watching the machine she had helped to build come apart plank by plank. When Sowerby was gone, she rose, still handsome, still upright, and made one last throw with the courage of a gambler staking her final coin. You will make a great deal of me now, I suppose, she said to the Duke. Your loyal cousin, who let her debts be settled out of your steward's river and knew, of course I knew, where every shilling came from. Turn me out then. Where to, cousin? I have 100 a year and a widow's cap, and the privilege of being poor among people who were once my equals. You have never in your life not known where you would sleep. She was shaking, though her chin stayed high. She hid a fortune to be free of a fat man's son. I would have hidden one to be free of the whole grinding pretense. I've been afraid for 15 years. It is very tiring, cousin. You cannot imagine how tiring it is. The Duke's face had gone hard as the forecourt, and Eloan saw that he was about to be just, and that justice would be the end of Lady Vespera Crane. Turned out, disgraced the county to feast on it for a 12-month. Your Grace, she said, may I? She went and stood before the frightened, upright, hateful woman who had tried that morning to ruin her, and she did not gloat, because she had learned long ago that gloating is the one thing a tormentor expects, and she had never once in her life given a tormentor what they expected. You let your debts be paid out of stolen money, Eloan said quietly, and that is theft, and you know it. But you did not falsify a rent. You did not squeeze Mistress Pellow for her shilling at Lady Day. That was Sowerby's hand. You watched, and you profited, and you held your tongue, which is precisely the sin I lived by myself until this morning, so I am poorly placed to hang you for it. She held the bright, terrified eyes. There is a dower house at the edge of the park, empty and sound. A woman might live in it decently on 100 a year and be neither served nor serving, and stop being so very tired if his grace is willing. You would owe it to no one, and least of all to me. I should like that understood. Lady Vespera stared at her, whatever she had braced to meet. It had not been mercy, and it undid her, worse than justice would have. Why? She said. It was not a graceful question, it was torn out of her. Because I know exactly how tiring it is, Eloan said. And because a house that has just thrown out one thief ought not to celebrate by making a beggar. Good night, Lady Vespera. There was a 4th person to be reckoned with, and Eloan reckoned with her differently, because Marin Merrick had followed her mother north and had stood at the edge of the forecourt all that day saying nothing, with the pinched, watchful look of a girl who had learned young to move through a loud house without knocking anything over. Eloan knew that look. She had worn it herself. When Adeline and Vane were sent back to their inn to go home to Thornwick with nothing, Vane's post horses unpaid, Adeline's own keeping of the Verity workshop about to face an honest man's inspection at last, Marin did not go with them at once. "You were not unkind to me," Eloan said to her. "In all those years, you were only afraid of her, as I was. There is honest work in a workshop that is about to want an honest mistress. When it is mine, if you would rather sew than be married off, there is a place in it for you." Marin wept, which she had plainly not done in a long time. And that was the beginning of the second thing. Eloan mended that summer that no one had asked her to. Adeline Merrick's guardianship did not, in the end, bear an honest man's looking at. What she had spent of the workshop was reckoned to the last shilling. Osric Vane's debts, built on a marriage that would now never happen, went home with him unforgiven. And when Eloan turned 25, 3 springs later her mother's workshop and the last of the Verity lace came into her own 2 hands at last, clear and free. She reopened it, and took poor girls into it, and taught them what her mother had taught her, and the Verity name went back over a door in Thornwick where it belonged. A thing you have won and then give freely is the one kind of wealth that no one can ever take off you again. But that was later. First, there was the East Wing. The Duke had not gone into it in a year. He went into it now, on a bright June evening with Eloan beside him, and the ancient keys turning the lock, and Sydney's wedding gown stood where it had been left, still on its frame, one sleeve unfinished, waiting for a hand that had not come back from the fever. The Duke stood a long while and could not speak. It was Eloan who took up the work, with the dowager's blessing and her own mother's silver thimble bright on her finger, and finished, over the quiet weeks that followed, the sleeve a dead girl had left undone. They did not sell the gown, nor hide it. They hung it in the long gallery where the light was good, and the house which had been holding its breath since April, at last let it go. He asked her in that gallery, at midsummer, with the doors open to the warm night. "I will not put a marriage of convenience before you," he said. "You have your mother's workshop coming, and your freedom with it. In 3 years you will need no man's roof to shelter under, and you must know that I know it. That is precisely why I am asking. Not because my house wants a mistress, it has had one since March. Because I have spent a year learning what a house loses, while its master will not look, and I find I cannot bear to spend another not looking at you." The almost smile, "Come the whole way, at last. Marry me as myself, choosing it or do not, and stay, and run the house I could not, and I will never trouble you with it again. Everything, from here, is yours to say." Eloan looked up at him, level and clear-eyed and unafraid, the way she had looked at him from the wet gravel of a market square in another life, when a man she did not know had watched a girl be shamed, and for once not looked away. "Lucan," she said. She had never used his name. The gallery heard her use it. "Yes, I will marry you as myself, choosing it. I have grown very tired of holding my tongue." And then, because she could not help it, "On one condition, your grace, Mistress Pellow's roof is mended before the harvest, properly, by the man who is actually paid to mend it." The Duke of Elvden laughed. It was not a sound the county had heard from him in 2 years, and it carried the length of the bright gallery. And from her chair by the door the Dowager Duchess set down her glass and allowed herself, at 79, to look for one moment entirely satisfied. She lived 2 years more, long enough to see the house full again, and to weep, exactly once, at the wedding which she pronounced the outside limit of what any sensible woman should permit herself. Eloan was married in her own gown, the one that had been sold in a market square to shame her, the verity lace pale at the bodice, worn now not for a man she was given to, but for one she had chosen. The dowager died the autumn after, in her chair in the south parlor, her spine straight to the last, and that was the one grief the summer could not mend, for the dead do not come back merely because the living have finally learned to be happy. But it is the way of houses. What can be mended, a good pair of hands will mend. On a warm evening at the end of that first summer, the Duke came looking for his wife, and found her where he had half known she would be, in the library, in the chair by the fire, the great honest account book open on her knee, kept now in a single hand, with no worn twin standing beside it in the dark. She was not reading it, she was only sitting with it, the way a person sits with a thing that has come right at last, her mother's silver thimble bright on her finger. "You have put the whole house into good order," he said from the doorway. "There is nothing left to save. Whatever will you do with yourself now, Duchess?" She looked up at him, level and gray-eyed and unafraid. The same look she had given him from the wet gravel of a forecourt on the first hour of the first day, when he had told his butler the house would keep no one, and been so entirely wrong. "I shall find something," she said. "I always do. I cannot bear waste. You know it is my besetting sin. Come and sit down. You are drowning in the doorway again." He came and sat down. The candle burned, and the house breathed around them, honey-colored and honest and full, a house that had held its breath for a very long time, and had that summer at last been allowed to let it go. She had come to Elvedon to disappear. She had ended as the most thoroughly seen woman in the county, and she had learned, to her own great surprise, the one thing her whole careful life had never taught her, that to be seen by the right person is not the danger you spend your years dreading. It is the only safety that ever deserved the name.